Ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding for your worship for the Mayor.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I think obviously we'll start with the extraordinary meeting. Do you want to take a seat? Right. Thank you. I'm okay. Right. 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 Good evening. Thank you. Good evening again. Clearly, as this is an extraordinary meeting, the prayers will be said at the second part. So, but obviously we need to take account of the fire evacuation procedure. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of this room and through here. Clearly, depend on where the fire is. Then you go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. This meeting's being webcast, so please be aware of that. Will you make sure you turn off all your mobile phones, and can you also please make sure that your ticket, as I call it, is fully in the machine so that we can continue and I can hear you. Okay. Have we any apologies for this evening's meeting?
Councillor Cubitt.
Right. I understand there's one being received for Councillor Cubitt. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Dan Putty and Councillor Lane Still.
Councillor Stuart Parker from both meetings.
Okay, I'm going to do it that way. Right, now we've got... That's better. Now we've got declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest?
Apologies from Councillor Cubitt. Thank you, Madam.
Right, thank you. Are there any other declarations of interest? Right, then we'll go on to item 3, which I will ask our Chief Executive to introduce, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We've got an item on the Extraordinary Council agenda, which is the proposed Basingstoke and Dean electoral review. I'd like to introduce colleagues from the Local Government Boundary Commission for England that are with us this evening. We've got Sir Tony Redmond, who is a lead commissioner. We've got Alison Everson, a review manager, and Emily Starkey, a review officer, who will be working with us in the period ahead. Madam Mayor, you may wish to seek agreement from members that following the presentation that we suspend full council standing orders and move into committee style to allow questions and answers. And in seeking the permission of members, you may also want to suggest that councillors ask one question and refrain from asking a second question until all councillors have had the opportunity to ask a question.
Right, thank you. Are we all agreed? Right. No objections, good.
Good evening, everyone. And first of all, could I thank you all for allowing us the time to come and talk to you to explain the electoral review for Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council. What we plan to do this evening is I'm going to ask Alison Everson, who is the review manager, to do a short presentation for you to explain the background to the review that we're going to undertake. And after that, there'll be opportunity to ask any questions of us, any observations you wish to make, any points to register, all helpful. So without further ado, I'll pass on to Alison. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here today. I just want to spend a little time going through the review process. I'm and I'm going to talk about why we're here in Basingstoke-and-Deane, what the review will determine, how we're going to undertake the review, the timeline for the process, and most importantly, how you can influence the review outcome. So why are we here in Basingstoke-and-Deane? Well, the Commission is required to provide for good levels of electoral equality across the country. Every year when electoral registers are published, we look to see which authorities have got poor levels of imbalance. And that we have two criteria, one of which is if 30% of your wards vary from the average by more than 10%, you meet our criteria. And if any ward has a variance greater than 30% from the average, you will meet our criteria. And actually in Basingstoke-and-Deane, you meet both of those criterion. 31% of the wards have a variance of greater than 10%, and Rooksdown ward has a variance of 42%. The map that you can see here shows the imbalances in Basingstoke itself. There are more electors than average, and in the surrounding rural areas there are fewer, understandably. You can see that the map shows that a lot of area is actually coloured, and there is imbalance across the geography of the borough. This means that even if your ward at the moment happens to have a good level of electoral equality, by virtue of having to equalise numbers across the borough, it's likely that all wards will change. Just because a particular ward at the moment currently has a good level of electoral equality doesn't mean that we will leave it alone, because we obviously have to look across the entire area. So this electoral review will determine the following 5 things. The total number of councillors, which we call council size. It will determine the total number of wards, the boundaries of each of those wards, the number of councillors elected to each ward, and the names of each ward. Things have changed slightly from the last review that was undertaken here. The 2009 Act introduced a presumption of any authority that elects by thirds to have wards with 3 members in. Currently you elect by thirds, but you have a variation of number of members of 1, 2 and 3. If as an authority you continue to have the existing electoral cycle of electing by thirds, the Commission will seek to return 3 members in each ward. There is an opportunity for you as a council to determine whether you want to move to an all-out council election once every 4 years, and if you do that, the Commission would need that decision to be taken in good time for them to take agreement on council size in November of this year. So how are we going to look at doing this electoral review in Basingstoke-and-Deane? It's carried out in 2 parts. The first part is council size, the number of councillors elected to the authority. The second part is the warding patterns, the boundaries, the names, etc. But you cannot do part 2 until you've done part 1. It's very tempting as soon as we come to visit areas such as yourselves that people get maps out and start looking at the ward boundaries. But what we actually ask you to do first of all is to consider how the council runs and how many members there should be elected to the authority. The Commission doesn't have a policy that council size should go up, down or stay the same. There is a trend in local government that there is a reduction in the number of councillors, but that isn't the Commission's policy. It just reflects how authorities have come to us in the last 10-15 years. This is an opportunity for you to think about how you want to shape and run the authority for the future. Reviews don't happen that often, and this is a chance for you to make a change. In doing so, you need to consider the following. How do you make decisions? Your cabinet, delegation, how do you provide for planning and licensing and make decisions on service provision and delivery? Your scrutiny and overview functions, how do you undertake that? Is it through task and finish groups? What is scrutinised and how? And would you wish to make any changes to those arrangements? In terms of partnerships, would the amount of outsourcing that you do at the moment, would that impact on your decisions to change council size? And thirdly, the representational role of members. Is that changing? Have any changes in IT development meant that fewer or more councillors are required? We've asked that you submit proposals on council size to the Commission by the 2nd of October this year. So moving to the second part of the electoral review process, when we discuss and agree warding patterns. This is the boundaries of the wards, the number of councillors elected to each ward, and the names of the ward. In making decisions on those things, the Commission will look at our 3 statutory criteria. There's 3 listed here. There's one is not weighted greater than the other. They're equal in the legislation. One is electoral equality for electors, and what the Commission will do is look at electoral equality at the beginning of the review process, but also in the legislation we're required to look at what the electoral equality will be 5 years from the end of the review, which is 2023. So when we talk about electoral equality, we're looking at an improvement electoral equality to 2023. Another of the statutory criterion are community identities and interests, and that is where we will be asking yourselves to tell us what the community identity is across the borough and for your particular patch. And the third of the criteria is effective and convenient local government. That influences our decisions on council size, but also when it comes to creating a warding pattern, that means for the Commission ensuring that a ward, for example, works as a whole, that a member can go from one end of the ward to the other without having to leave that ward, and it makes sense as a coherent whole. In terms of timing of this part of the review, we'll be first giving you the opportunity to explain where the boundaries should be from the 28th of November to the 5th of February. So that's an open consultation. We will simply start that consultation by saying there will be X number of electors for Basingstoke and Dean. Please submit to us where you think the ward boundaries should be. We'll then collate all the evidence that you give us, and it will be yourselves, parish and town councils, community groups, members of the public, and we've asked your officer colleagues to provide us with a list of people who we should be writing to who may be interested in the review. Once everybody has written to us, we'll collate the evidence and come and visit the area to make sure that it's not just a desk-based exercise, but we're able to actually look at the evidence that comes in, and where there's conflicting information, we can come and have a look at it for ourselves on the ground. We'll then put together a set of draft recommendations and publish them in a report with a map. And this is your second opportunity to comment on the boundaries, number and names of wards. That's the timetable up there. 2nd of October is your first milestone with the proposals for council size coming to us. We'll invite consultation in November this year. Consultation on the draft recommendations will be next summer, and we will publish final recommendations in September next year. The elections which reflect these new boundaries will come into force elections in 2019. I've explained how we will undertake a review and detailed when you can get involved, but it's really about yourself as members making a difference and influencing the review and getting people in your areas to contribute to the review as well. You know the local community, it's about yourselves influencing it for the long term. These are going to be the wards that you represent. The Commission is completely transparent. Every review, every proposal that is received goes on our website. Everybody will have the opportunity to look at all the recommendations that we receive. And we ask that everybody does take the opportunity to look at them. In terms of what are effective representations and will help the Commission make the right decisions, we ask that you use parishes as building blocks in those areas where there are parishes. We cannot amend the external boundaries of parishes. It's something that we quite often are requested to do. However, the legislation does not allow the Commission to change the parish boundaries. The only thing that can change as a result of this review in relation to parishes is where a borough ward crosses through a parish, we will create parish wards in those areas. The Commission has taken the decision to come to Basingstoke and Dean. So, as I said previously, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Doesn't work, because we need to look across the borough as a whole. Parliamentary boundaries follow the borough ward boundaries, so we won't be looking at those. Equally, postcodes and addresses don't influence the Commission's decisions on where ward boundaries should be. Things that we do want is information about where communities are based on rationale, not assertion. Tell us what you like and tell us what you don't like. Very often it's common that we will hear when we've got our draft recommendations wrong, which is quite natural, but please do tell us also if we've got them right, because if you don't tell us that we've got them right, somebody else might tell us that we've got them wrong and we'll change them, and it will be too late for you to make another proposal to us. Practical community examples are what persuade the Commission far more than things such as petitions or pro forma letters. It's evidence from any one individual, doesn't matter whether it's a member of the public, parish council, or the council itself. It's what is contained in the information in that proposal to us. So just to summarise, we're here because the electoral equality across the borough is poor. We will be looking at the following 5 things and nothing else: the total number of councillors elected to the borough, the total number of wards, the boundaries of those borough wards, the number of councillors elected to each ward, and if things stand as they do now in terms of your electoral cycle, which is by thirds, we will return 3 members, except in extenuating circumstances where you can demonstrate that the statutory criteria are better reflected with a 1 or a 2 member ward, we will be returning 3 member wards. Just to give you some indication, in the last 4 or 5 years, there have been a handful, perhaps less than 5, where in an authority that elects by thirds, we've recommended anything other than 3 members. Happy to pass back to Sir Tony.
Okay, thanks very much, Alison. So, we'll be very pleased now to hear your question. Should I?
Councillor Keith Watts first.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was very much involved in the last review in Basingstoke shortly before I joined the council, and that informs my question. Will you be sticking rigidly to the 10% numbers, or are there guidelines? And if you decide to waive that in any case, can that be done by dialogue rather than diktat? The circumstances were that I was representing the North West Hampshire part of the borough in a joint presentation, and at the end of the process, to everybody's surprise, the Liberal Democrat proposals were the basis of the Boundary Committee's proposals. And there are lots of words such as gerrymandering thrown around. Now, part of the reason for that was that the council's own submission was completely invalid. It broke one of the rules we've already mentioned. But there was a great difficulty in the patch I was advising on with 2 particular wards, 2 particular parishes, which were said to be overrepresented. In one case, I actually wrote late at night, drew the boundary that still exists between wards in Tadley, and everybody who goes there says it's crazy. In the other case, the Boundary Committee waived the 10%. Had we had a dialogue, the waiving the 10% in the case of East Woody would have enabled a more elegant solution of the adjacent wards. And of course, waiving it with regard to Tadley would have meant we had no problem at all, because the town council wanted to keep.
What's this question? And I'm sorry, I haven't quite heard.
The question, I began with the question,
yeah,
Madam
please.
Chairman, which is, will you stick rigidly to the guidelines, and if you if you don't, can we have a dialogue, not just receive the next submission having changed the rules behind our back?
The 10% is an important guideline for us because what we seek to do is to try, as part of the 3 criteria that Alison explained to you, is to ensure that there aren't any significant variances from the average across the whole review. Now, we recognise that not every review will reach an outcome which is 0. We know that because the reality is it's not going to work that way. But what we do not believe is appropriate is to have a number of outcomes where the variance is very significant, and 10% and 10% plus is significant. So yes, there are circumstances where we will allow or entertain or agree with a percentage which is 10% or maybe even slightly more, but it has to be based on very clear grounds relating to community identity and effective and convenient local government. In other words, those other 2 criteria are so powerful that we recognise that we might make an allowance or an exception for that particular proposal. We will, when we receive your submissions, look very critically at the variances, and if indeed you propose something which is in excess of 10%, we'll test very rigorously whether there is a reason for an exception. If there is not, we will look to find an alternative. Yes, therefore, that will then be put out to consultation. When we make our draft recommendations, you will have the opportunity to respond to those, and we will take those into account before we make our final recommendations. So there is an opportunity for you to make your views known if you believe there is a particular reason why we should treat a particular variance as an exception.
Thank you. Councillor Rowland.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Could you clarify the point that you made with regard to a ward crossing through parishes and a creation of, I think I heard it as a creation of a parish? Thank you.
The position with parishes, as Alison explained, is that we cannot change the boundaries of a parish. But if the best outcome in terms of warding patterns is to actually have a parish which crosses boundaries, 1, 2 or 3, we would in those circumstances ward the parish. But it would be on the basis that that is the best outcome. It is not a normal thing to ward parishes, but we do it if it meets the criteria and makes the best, produces the best outcome.
Madam Mayor, Tony, could you just explain what warding a parish means? Because I think that would help members.
The warding of a parish means that if you take 2 of the wards that we propose in this review, and the parish actually crosses the boundary of those 2 wards, then we will divide the parish according to where the boundary sits for those 2 wards. And on each side there will be a parish ward.
Sorry, can you... I don't mind if you put your hand... But I'm sorry, I think
yes,
I
the
don't quite understand. If you can just
sorry, the identity of the parish and the boundaries of the parish itself do not change in any way. It is merely that what happens is that if you have a parish which crosses 2 ward boundaries, then you have to divide the parish into 2 wards, not change the parish boundary itself, but divide it into 2 wards. So the parish is warded. Yep.
Right, should we go to the next person? Yeah, okay then. Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for your presentation. It's very clear, which is why I have one question only. You referred to the transparency of the department, and therefore one's submission would be available on the internet to all interested parties. And the only simple question I wanted to ask is, does that mean all input is available to all? Thank you.
Yes, we make sure that we are totally transparent in all the deliberations of the Commission and what recommendations will be.
Right, thank you. Next, Councillor Cousins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's just two very quick points which I want to put forward to the Commission. On page 2 of your report, you have the map of the borough. You have coloured in my ward, Brookvale and Kings Furlong, as a positive variance greater than 10%, but it doesn't according to your current numbers. So that needs to be updated. Also, secondly, on the very large pack that you've given us as well, I note that Brookvale and Kings Furlong is the only ward that isn't referenced, and I wanted to know why that was the case.
My apologies on your first point. The reasons for the difference, I think, is when we decided to do the review, it was based on December 2015 data. Obviously, since then, electoral registers have been republished and we've used that data. And I think what must have happened is we've kept the old data in one set of information and the new set of data in the other. I didn't catch the ward and where you think it's not. That's the scale of the map at this level. We'll obviously be looking across the entire town and will include the ward that you currently represent.
Thank you. Councillor Isaac.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening, Sir Tony. I do have some concerns that a default position of the Commission is really about reducing the number of councillors and saving a few £1,000s. In adjoining West Berks, a unitary council, it has just been announced that the number of councillors will reduce by 24% from 52 to 42, saving £84,000 a year. I think you need to trade carefully in Basingstoke and recognise that differences exist. Our population is increasing, but so is the workload on borough councillors. We live in an age where the consumer is king. People want quick answers and fire-off emails expressing their frustrations if they don't get them. I think, along with parish councils, this borough council is generally an effective level of local democracy and is seen as such by many residents. You have the power, but my plea is please be careful about what you do in the long-term interests of a healthy, responsive local democracy in this borough. I hope we will not end up with saving a few bob, a hollowed-out council, and because of workload, increasing difficulties in attracting good people to take on responsibilities of serving their communities. As to 3-member wards, I think this will cause confusion amongst residents as to who is their local councillor, again risking impairment of accountability and representative democracy, particularly if political division within these 3-member wards increases as a result. So what I would like to say at this point is, does he recognise that what I have here are genuine concerns and probably shared by a lot of councillors in this chamber?
Well, yes, I can give you one very clear reassurance, and that is that the Commission is not here because it wishes to reduce the size of this council. And if one refers to what Alison was saying earlier, where there has been a number of reviews where there have been reductions in the council size, they've all been at the behest of the council itself. We respect very strongly the views and wishes and ideas that the council puts forward. All we ask of you is you have the evidence put forward to support the case. We do not come here with any preconceived notion or idea that we want to reduce your council size. That has been occasioned by councils themselves wanting to reduce their council size. What we will do is respect your submission. If it's well evidenced, we will not be looking to reduce your council size. On the second point, on the 3-member wards, well, it is within your gift to change that. We can only act upon that which exists at the moment, which is that you have a 3-member ward configuration. And we will operate on that basis unless you as a council decide to change that. So it is within your gift to decide if you wish to change that.
Thank you. Councillor Tristram Robinson.
When this works. Thank you very much. I guess my point leads on from Councillor Isaac's point on the mandatory position as we see it on 3-member wards unless the council moves to an all-out election. I completely understand and agree that that is a matter for us, but I guess the confusion for me, and I suspect some other councillors here, is why we are in a position where if we do not move to all-out elections, we lose the ability to have 1, 2 and 3-member wards. And particularly in Basingstoke and Deane, where we do have a very large rural area and diverse rural areas, the thought of making some of the current wards a lot bigger, I mean, you can see some of them on the map, which are represented by one councillor. I think that would lead to not brilliant representation.
Yes, again, this is not something that we are just imposing upon you. It is that legislation dictates that if you have a 3-member ward arrangement here, we have to operate on that basis because the legislation has changed to expect us to do it. So if you as a council choose to change that, we will certainly respect and observe that, and we will actually carry out a warding pattern on the basis of single-member ward.
Right, thank you. The last person that put their hand up so far is Councillor Faulkner. In case there's anybody else that wants to speak, if you'd like to raise your hands. Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The question is, are the borough boundaries sacrosanct? Councillor Isaac and I cover the Burghclere, Highclere, St Marybourne, which borders the dark side up at West Berkshire, but Test Valley on the south side, so it's a huge area. Will you only be doing the reorganisation within the borough's boundaries, or might you be tempted to hive off a hamlet to another authority?
This review is to look only at the warding pattern within the boundaries of Basingstoke and Deane. We do not come in to look at all. We have no intention, because this is a periodic review. It's not a structural or a periodic principal boundary review. We're doing neither of those. This is simply to look at the warding pattern within the existing boundaries of the council.
Right, Councillor Tony Jones.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is, it's quite interesting when you say we don't have many boundary reviews. Over the last 20 years, we've had quite a few in Basingstoke. And at the last boundary review, which was in Buckskin, we knew before it even kicked off would be overprescribed. Are we going to look into making sure that the wards aren't overprescribed in a few years' time? Because we are a growing town, and we need to look into it, because, as I say, I've been here 20 odd years, and God knows how many boundary reviews we've had, and it's 3 or 4? 3. And to my mind, that's 3 too many. But that's the question.
Thank you for that. The way we go about looking at your population and electric growth is we will ask you to provide information regarding what you see as the growth over the next 6 years. So we seek to future-proof, at least to some degree, the likely changes in your electorate over that period of time. What we seek of you, in order to give us assurance that these things are going to happen, are planning consent, more than just an outline planning permission. We also want to see some evidence that this is going to actually take shape in that 6 years period. So construction, completion and occupation. so that we can see within 6 years the electorate will change. So we do make some considerable efforts to try and future-proof. We can't go beyond 6 years, because if we go into a very long period, then we're going to find there's going to be a significant electoral variance now in order to anticipate what happens in 10 to 12 years' time. So we hope that gives you some assurance that at least we're trying to future-proof, and we'll look to you to give us the evidence to support that 6-year growth to be reflected in the way in which we construct this review.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Miller, and then Councillor Robinson, you've indicated have your second question. If anybody else, is there anybody else that hasn't spoken that wants to speak before we go into people get the opportunity to have a second question? No? Okay then, Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is, have you been supplied with a copy of our adopted local plan? Because that is more substantive, I would suggest, than waiting for actual planning permissions and building structures. We have an adopted local plan. We have a program of so many houses to be built in various developments. We have quite a few planning permissions already granted. Some are outside of the local plan. So in total, I suggest that the adopted local plan will give you the information you require. My question was, have you got the local plan and have you examined it?
Well, we're only about to commence the review, so we'll be calling upon all this information from you in the very near future. The local plan is an important piece of information and evidence, certainly. But we do have, on occasions, being given to us information that suggests a very significant growth in the electorate of a particular council that then does not materialise. And that is not in the interest of the council either, for the very reason that you state, because that then creates an imbalance in the period that over 6 years in the forecast did not materialise. So yes, please, we will take all the information that you can possibly supply to us, which supports the case for growth in your electorate, and we will incorporate that in our own review if that's appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Then Councillor Robinson. Yes.
Thank you again, Madam Mayor, for bearing with me. Just to press slightly on a point on the 3-member wards in the all-out elections, as I understand it, the Local Democracy, Economic Development and Construction Act 2009 says that we should give regard to the desirability of recommending the appropriate number of councillors. So where councillors elect by thirds, it's 3-member wards. Where councillors elect by halves, and all outs you can have whatever you like. But one of the quirks of the legislation, again, is that you can't go to halves unless you've been to all outs first. You have to go from thirds to all outs back to halves, which seems rather silly. But I guess what I'm saying is that there is nothing in that. It says we have to have regard to the desirability. It doesn't say you have to do it. So I guess what I'm seeking is reassurance that you will be taking into account the nature of the way that Basingstoke and Deane is constructed when considering 1 and possibly 2-member wards in addition to 3-member wards.
The presumption that we take from the Act is that we will start with looking at a configuration of 3-member ward. As Alison said in her presentation, there may be exceptions where we can look at a possible variation in that. But only when we get the submissions from you and when we get the basis upon which you make this case can we make any judgment as to whether there should be any variation from that presumption. But there is a degree of flexibility in certain circumstances. But that's the starting point. But I would reiterate that if you were to feel unhappy about the configuration of 3-member wards, then you do have the opportunity to change that to all out if you wish to pursue it on that basis.
Right, thank you. I've got nobody else that's indicated. Is there anybody that wants to come in now? Last chance. I expect you'll probably be hearing from us. Nobody else? Right, Paul? Right, well in that case, thank you. We've got Sir Tony Redmond, and I know the name because my ice hockey player is called Tony. We've already had that conversation. Alison Evson, who's the review manager, and Emily Starkle, who's the review officer. And thank you very much in taking time to come and speak to us, but I'm sure you'll probably be hearing from quite a few of us. And yes, I was just going to do that. So thank you very much. Can I just remind councillors that our meeting proper will start at 7:30, so we will break till then, because apart from the fact we've got public speakers and other people that are relying on the 7:30 start. So thank you very much, and we'll take a break.